Good morning, and thank you for joining me for this midweek reflection from Holy Saviour Church in Hitchin. This week began with the feast day of St. Patrick. And speaking as someone who's of Irish birth and Irish parentage, he's one of those saints who I always find a really fascinating figure. And there's something very powerful and interesting and moving about the story of St. Patrick, especially if you've never really looked into it. Patrick was born into a very comfortable Christian family in Britain. And just before his 16th birthday, he was snatched, abducted from his comfortable home by Irish raiders. And he ended up minding sheep in the west of Ireland. It was something that might well have destroyed him, but instead, somehow through God's providence, great good came from it for Patrick himself and for many countless others. It's a very strange thing, but faith can often thrive in adversity. It's a little bit like sometimes you can plant a wild flower in your garden and it just goes to seed. But if you put the same wild flower on a wild, rugged mountainside, it thrives and it blooms. Suffering can bring us much closer to God because we might only have God to rely on. And strange things can happen when you've nothing to rely on except God's help. And this seems to have been the case for Patrick. In his confession, the text which he's left to us, he tells us that when he was a boy at home, God seemed very far away. He even goes so far as to say, "I did not know the true God." That now that he was away from home and feeling the pain of loneliness, God became a faithful friend to him. He discovered the joy of believing, the rapture of faith in God. And daily prayer became as important to him as daily bread. Well, somehow, after 6 years, he escaped from Ireland. And after many wanderings and all sorts of adventures, he eventually returned home. And his relatives gave him a very, very warm welcome, and they begged him to never leave them again. So it seems this experience of slavery left no obvious scars on Patrick. This school of hardship and suffering didn't embitter him. In fact, it completely changed his outlook on life. On looking back, he realised that he had gained far more than he'd lost during his years of slavery. And in this way, it seems God had been preparing him for his future mission to the Irish. Patrick might then have just kind of settled down to a nice, comfortable life and forgotten the people who'd imprisoned him. But instead, he heard those same people calling him to come and walk among them again. And, as we know, he did go back as a bishop. And he tells us that he went back to share with them the gift God gave me in the land of my captivity, the gift of the Christian faith. Patrick, I think, is one of those saints whose story will always be very relevant to us. He seems to have been really a genuinely humble man, someone who was a friendly personality with great capacity to forgive others. There doesn't seem to have been very much selfishness in him at all. Instead, there was great generosity. He showed great courage and strength in the face of all kinds of trials and hardships. He had no interest in money and material possessions, but he did have a great, great love for people. His faithfulness to his vocation is a huge inspiration to all of us. We might even go as far as to say that Patrick was a kind of model Christian, in that his lifestyle, as well as his personal integrity, lent credence to the things that he actually said. He was a living example of the gospel that he also preached. People came to admire his goodness. Little wonder that he made so many, many converts. The faith that was preached by Patrick was a positive faith, a life-giving faith. It banished all sorts of fears that people had. It brought something new, something hopeful into people's lives. It gave people a vision, and a life without vision is like a night with no stars. However, it wasn't an easy faith. It was a very challenging faith that inspired sacrifice and service to those who embraced it. Patrick was driven by a desire to share his faith with others, and it's clear that this rubbed off on his converts, because missionary outreach has been part of has been a characteristic of Irish Christianity ever since. Christianity is never something to be kept to ourselves. It always involves outreach to others. And without that dimension, it really wouldn't be the Christian faith. Nowadays, in the 21st century, Ireland seems to be enjoying a time of great material prosperity, and I'm glad to say, in recent decades at least, relative peace. Ironically though, alongside that, the Christian faith seems to be in a period of decline. And that's very sad, not least because Patrick brought this gift to the people of Ireland at such great personal cost. Perhaps then we might take a moment today to pray for the men and the women and the children of the island of Ireland, and to pray for their faith, because without faith there is no reason for anything, and nothing really is in its proper place. Our hymn for today is Be Thou My Vision, and may God's peace go with you.